I'm Rona Walensky, one of your hosts for the Mindful Education Summit 2019, brought to you by the Awake Network and Mindful. Our guest for this session is Linda Lantieri, who is one of the earliest leaders of the mindfulness in education movement. Linda was a founder of CASEL, the collaborative for academic, social, and emotional learning. She's currently a senior advisor for the Transformational Educational Leadership Program. She's also adjunct faculty at Columbia and their master's program on spirituality and education. And that's just what she's doing in her retirement. Linda is very well known for the work she did right after 9/11 in helping the school communities where children and teachers had to flee for their lives after the 9/11 explosions in New York. She has also worked extensively in schools in Vermont. She was one of the founders and leaders of the initiative in Warren, Ohio. It is now in its 10th year. And she's our guest with us today to talk about the wisdom she's accrued in all of that time. Welcome, Linda.
Good to be here.
Thank you for taking time to spend with us. So the place I'd like to begin, you were one of the first people, if not the first person, to publicly talk about the connection between social emotional learning, SEL as we sometimes call it, and mindfulness. And I know that our viewers would be very interested in understanding your perspective on how those two different bodies of knowledge and experience are connected in a deep way.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's just wonderful to be here and wonderful to join so many of you virtually. And this is an exciting topic for me because it's what I have spent my life and my work in. So I guess I think you alluded to it, Rona, when you talked about that I was asked as a former principal in the New York City schools and worked at Central Board of New York City schools for a long period of time in a variety of capacities to help with the healing after September 11th. Most people don't know that 8,000 kids ran for their lives and 400 parents, teachers, and principals were part of the rescuing effort. And the good news, of course, most of us know is that there was no physical harm to anybody. They were able to escape walking up the West Side Highway and the East Side Highway. But what also happened is that clearly there were some other scars. And I felt it was a moment where I could bring all of who I really am into the picture, and that I would be trusted to do that. And that is, for me, the spiritual dimension or the inner life work. I've been a meditator for a very long time, since I was 26 years old. It's a regular, non-negotiable part of my life. And yet that was still the part that was not present for me in a more visible way in terms of K through 12 education. And when we began to do that healing work, it was clear that we needed so much more than social and emotional learning. We needed to really restore what was happening inside and really help have an opportunity to have a safe space within to really move forward. And so it was quite a quick opportunity for that to happen. And then at the same time, a book that I had been working on hit the bookstores 10 days before September 11th, called Schools with Spirit, Nurturing the Inner Life of Children and Teachers. And so it was this convergence that plummeted me really to being able to have both the opportunity and the responsibility to bring all of what we knew to help these young people and the teachers and parents and educational leaders that were part of things. So I had a very free kind of experience in bringing in the mindfulness piece to the work. It was probably the only example of money that was going toward 9/11 that went to something beside secondary intervention like therapy for kids and parents and teachers. This was a primary intervention.
So you did that work, you had a chance to literally on the ground integrate SEL and mindfulness, but you've also written about the connections between
Yes.
SEL and mindfulness. And I wondered if you'd be willing to share the way you think about it from a sort of analytical point of view. SEL does
Sure.
this and mindfulness
Sure.
does that.
Yeah. First of all, I don't think we would doubt that the field of education is now moving more and more toward the acceptance of social and emotional learning as an absolute part of teaching and learning. And I have recognized that over the years, and it's very clear. I just got back from one of the largest conferences of its kind. We celebrated our 25th anniversary of CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. So school districts all over the country are clearly more and more realizing that learning and teaching is social and emotional. And there's also a whole body of work around mindfulness and the value of teaching young people to focus, to monitor their attention, to have an attitude of acceptance and openness toward their thoughts and their feelings. And so it's just such a perfect combination. I see that in SEL, we've developed these 5 components: self-awareness, self-management, social skills, relationship skills, and appropriate or responsible decision-making. Well, mindfulness done well can enhance all of those skills and could really help both adults and children actually embody those skills. Skills are something that develop over time, and it needs a firm foundation. So I kind of see the mindfulness work as the inside out approach work, where we're developing our inner core, our center of resilience that gets stronger and stronger through a regular practice. And by the way, when I talk about mindfulness, I'm thinking in a very wide way. People can nurture that inner life in a variety of ways, from yoga to actually having a formal sitting meditation, to something called Lectio Divina, where we are looking at a inspirational text, or having a regular time where we read a inspirational text regularly, or sing, or even I would consider a mindfulness practice is when I'm seeing a lot of the activists around Extinction Rebellion, for example, being able to stay centered in their nonviolent approach to their civil disobedience. So there are a lot of ways we could think about what we're talking about in terms of taking time to nurture our inner lives. And so for me, social emotional learning is a field that has developed deeply. We can learn from it in terms of the mindfulness work, and it clearly can enhance the mindfulness work can be enhanced by SEL, and SEL can be enhanced by the mindfulness work without a question. I see them beautifully integrated.
I think I remember reading a blog on the Greater Good Science Center, and I often quote you talking about that mindfulness helps us cultivate a set of habits and dispositions and internal awareness of what's going on, and social emotional curricula and practices give us a set of skills. So if you have the disposition to be open to what's happening, social and emotional learning will give you the skills to work with that well. Or if you're in a conflict and you've stopped, you knew to stop, but then what do you say? Well, social and emotional learning has a wide range of strategies, lessons for that.
It's a beautiful way of saying it, absolutely. And I also feel that there are skills involved in mindfulness work as well, that we are helping kids to strengthen their focusing ability. in a variety of ways. We are helping them to understand the idea of open awareness, where they're noticing their sensations in their bodies. So for example, in SEL, we talk a lot about self-awareness, being able to label our emotions. And yet we're learning clearly through the brain research and variety of other ways that we have a sensation about that feeling before we can actually verbalize a feeling. So the sensation part, that we start to notice the inner life of ourselves and we notice what's going on in our bodies, is clearly, again, the mindfulness piece of the work that gets strengthened. And so then, again, we could easily, possibly then identify, well, what is that emotion, which is a much further on capacity. And mindfulness provides some of the ability to do that.
And similarly with some of our ruminative negative self-talk, where we begin to recognize thoughts that we're having rather than being had by our thoughts.
Exactly. Same thing. You know, that's there are so many things that we talk about in the mindfulness world that can enhance our understanding of how to get to really develop the skills of that SEL is talking about. You know, I think we need the ability of ourselves to be able to focus, to be able to center, to do all of those things. You know, in the blog you were talking about, I talked about a young man who was clearly a beautiful example of working with social and emotional learning in his school. He was at Satellite Academy in the South Bronx. He was a mediator, etc. And then one day I got a call from the principal who said, you know, this young man is going to get suspended. He did something really awful. There was a girl whose birthday it was, and people brought balloons, helium balloons for her, and they were popping them just in a fun way. And the first pop, he said, please stop. And by the second pop, he was taking the girl that was doing it, and he almost, you know, hurt her as he held her to a wall. And I was shocked, you know. So I said, can you wait? Can I get up there? And so I did get up there. And long story short, when Eugene, 6'2", was in a room with me alone, and we went over what happened, and clearly this is not how a mediator acts. He began to cry when I asked him, so when you heard the pop, you know, what happened for you? That's all I asked. And with this, he began to cry and said, it sounded like what the gun could have sounded like if it went off when it was in my mouth. And so he had had the trauma of a loaded gun in his mouth that didn't go off. And of course, that's what was happening. He was hijacked. And so clearly I felt like at that moment, wow, I gave him all the skills, but he had no awareness about trauma. He had no awareness that that can hijack him in terms of using the skills. All of that work, I would say, is the mindfulness work. So we owe it to our young people and to our children to give them the whole picture, all of what they need to really be as resilient as they possibly can be in the world. He taught me a lot that day.
And of course, we then are connecting the dots between mindfulness, SEL, trauma sensitive, and I would say and hope that what happened was a more restorative piece of discipline, recognizing that harm had been done, but understanding that our goal was to repair the harm, but bring Eugene back into the community, not to expel him from it.
Exactly. You've got it. Yeah.
So let's turn a little bit. Let's bring the clock forward to your current life. And you have been working with several others. I won't name them for fear that I might not name all of them. I know some of them, but I'm not sure. To create a program called Transformational Educational Leadership, or maybe Transformative. You'll correct me here.
It's transformative.
Transformative educational leadership. And I had the good fortune to interview Kevlin Jones. I don't know if that interview is
Oh, yeah.
going to show up on this series before or after.
Oh, how wonderful.
And in passing, he mentioned that he had been to TEL and how important it was. So could you share with us what it is, but as importantly as what it is, why you chose to focus on educational leadership at this point?
Yes. Well, as we continued the work with CASEL, we decided as CASEL, as the main group thinking about this work in schools and social and emotional learning, to focus in on several districts over time. And we did that, and we learned a lot. And what we also learned, I feel, what I came away with was that there were many educational leaders who had reached principal and above, who were trying to do this work well and had the structures in place and the ideas of how to do it. And yet they, as more advanced leaders, were not supported in any way. And there was a real vacuum there. And I began to realize that that vacuum needed to be filled. And a couple of other colleagues of mine, in particular, Mina Srinivasan and Daniel Rickshoffen, agreed. And we slowly, but then before we knew it, quickly formed a year-long program for educational leaders who were already in positions of power and had a real strong circle of influence. And they would come together as a beloved community, both in person and on Zoom calls for a year, and help them integrate into their leadership 3 threads. Leadership is actually one of them, so it's 4 threads: equity, SEL, and mindfulness. Why? Because these things were not being quite integrated yet in what we were saying and doing in the world of SEL. The equity piece was getting in there, but the mindfulness piece was not at all. And so we completed our first year of 70 people in the cohort, 50%, actually 40% people of color, and Kevlin was one of them. And the good news is that we learned so much from this first cohort, and we are taking a break before the next cohort, which will be July 2020. And the second cohort will happen, and we actually will open registration for that in probably a couple of weeks at the end of October. And the reason is that we really feel there needs to be more of an emphasis on cultivating our inner lives to do the work of social justice and collective activism that we're talking about when you really come to it. That to have the courage, to have the stamina, to have the long-term stability to do this work, we need to be in community with each other, and we need to be with others who are doing this work, and we need to learn how to integrate these various threads. So I'm very excited about this. I feel like we're really giving a group of educational leaders all of what they need to do the job that they need to do.
In last year's Mindful Education Summit, I had an opportunity to interview Mark Greenberg, whose work connects to this, I'm sure in ways that you are familiar with, but
Yes.
He is now speaking a lot about the role of the school leader.
Right.
There are other levels, of course, of educational leadership.
Yep.
I think they're all involved in your program. But the importance of the school leader embodying and being the SEL leader for the building. It's not enough to be just an incredibly busy person, which most schools are, and efficient and organized and, accomplishing many tasks. It's also crucial to create a culture and a tone that people realize SEL and mindfulness, as well as equity work, of course, are deeply valued.
Yes, exactly. And, you know, we so far are not paying enough attention to that piece. It's happening slowly, the adult piece, the adult development piece. But remember, all of our research in social emotional learning has been on efficacy of a program. It's almost like teacher proof. You could just give it to the teacher. And of course, we're clearly learning from the work of mindfulness that if you're not embodying the skills, you're not embodying a disposition of being centered, then good luck. You know, that is going to be the single most variable that will affect success in terms of this being really rooted into the school and the school district.
I had a conversation last year with, now it'll escape me, but someone from Castle. I'll try not to perseverate on it. And it was in reference to the learnings that had come out of the Collaborative School Project, which is that multi-district project that
Yes.
you're talking about. And she shared with me that one of the key lessons was that there is no systematic implementation of SEL among students unless there is SEL development among adults. And similarly, there is no really systematic implementation of SEL if there isn't an equity component in it. But I'd like to keep the focus on this, the SEL skills of adults, because it's work I do and work I find is very hard to get done because
Yes.
everyone wants to work on the students first.
Right.
And doing self-care and focusing on self is not the way people in caring professions work. So I'm wondering if you could just reflect some on what it will take to actually shift the focus to bringing capacity, greater capacity. I think most people who go into teaching have SEL skills,
Yes.
but the stress of teaching will undermine those without ongoing tending. So just speaking to this topic, what have you learned, Linda?
Yeah, well, first of all, I've learned that the mindfulness field, which hopefully soon will be integrated, that we're not, you know, I think we need to be a field for a while longer, but then I think we need to just integrate within the SEL movement, because it's where, in schools anyway, where it's going to happen and where it mostly will take root. But clearly, what I've learned is that the adult piece is as critically important as you say. And I think the mindfulness world is helping adults realize that. I think that they're coming up short, so to speak. You know, the work in Castle, the person wouldn't have said that 5 years ago. They would have said all the things we learned, have a good program, you know, have good benchmarks, make sure there's continuous improvement, all of those things, which are all true. But I think what happened is when we did all of that, we still fell short, and we realized the SEL piece and the inner work piece is clearly something that will hold us back otherwise. And so I think slowly but surely, people are realizing that. And I think that we have to have more solid research in it. There's very, very little research. And there are some people that are doing that right now. And I'm happy to say Mark Greenberg, you mentioned, is one of them. Tish Jennings is another, who are really helping us, you know, make the case, so to speak, that when adults' inner lives are tended to and attention is paid, that the rest gets better. And I think we need more research as well around that. But I think the tide is turning. I really do. And then we need places where they can do it. You know, Castle did some research recently, a while back actually, asking schools, so what's your most impediment in terms of bringing this work in, like what happens to you. And 1 out of 3 said professional development, that there's no time for it. And so we have to start to be able to help people say, oh, I'm going to take that professional development time and it's going to be for adult SEL. And I'm seeing that happen more and more. And I think as we bring in the mindfulness piece, it will root the work that's the inner work much better. And I think it'll be received a lot better. And by the way, 1 out of 4 said that they needed implementation support. In other words, they felt like, you know, don't leave me, just here's the program kind of thing. And finally, there was, where's the time in the school day? And so it's up to those of us that are in the world of mindfulness and SEL to really integrate things into the school day in such a way that it isn't this separate thing that happens.
As we've, one of the things that we're doing in this summit, as our viewers, I hope know, is we're featuring case studies of people doing it on the ground. And I've been doing some of those interviews, not all of those interviews. But a theme that is in those interviews is schools have been fortunate enough to be able to pair with a funder who is able to provide them with expertise and that ongoing support. And it strikes me that that's where we are. We're in a situation where exceptional circumstances allow us to prove the concept. And as you say, we need to collect the data, which is happy. But for the ordinary school that doesn't have extra money to buy extra time or to pay for the expertise of outsiders who can come in and support their staffs, there are, it's really hard to make it happen. What are your thoughts about that? What are your suggestions about that? We have thousands of people who are signed up for this summit who are going to want to know, well, what can I do? And they may not have access to extra funding or extra expertise.
Well, first of all, I think a couple of things. One, it really is a time for philanthropy to step up, particularly around the mindfulness work. They've already stepped up big time with the SEL work, I'm happy to say. And I think that there will be some early funders who are more courageous, who realize the deep connection between the two and will fund the kinds of things that, for example, is happening for us with transformative educational leadership. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is that certainly there are things that are already developed that we can use. And one of them is Castle's District Resource Center. And now we have Castle Resource Guide for Schools. And so it is meant to be freely used. It's open sourcing for all of this. That was the agreement we made with the funders that gave us the money to do it. So a lot of that is there. There's no question about it. That's first of all. Secondly, we're seeing that more and more in state and federal money, at least the words social and emotional learning are being used, that you can use money for that purpose. And so we can take some of that professional development money and use it in that way. So that's the second thing. And then the last is what I mentioned, that philanthropy has an important role to play here. Always does when something is at the cutting edge and needs some assistance in terms of proving its worth. And it's the courageous funders who are willing to do that.
So just opening up the lens a little bit and reflecting on your long and storied career in this field, what other lessons have you learned? What other insights do you have? What do you want to pass on to the people who are coming after you?
Well, first of all, I hope there are a lot of people that, as Thich Nhat Hanh talks about, will be my continuation of the work. So that's, first of all, what I'm hoping. Secondly, I think Tapaka Palmer, who's been one of my teachers and elders for a long time, and he talks about doing the work before the work. And to me, mindfulness is really the work before the SEL work, except that we're just realizing that now. And so basically it means anything you're trying to do in the world, the bigger it is, the more internal work we need to be doing. And that's, again, part of why we created this year-long program, because people are more and more getting opportunities of, you know, being in a circle of influence, in a sphere of power that they just never thought they would have, and they want to do it well. So I would say that to keep that balance is key, and to make sure that is the case for each of us, that we do enough of our inner work, that the outer work reflects that, and that eventually, as Parker talks about, we're divided no more, that the truth we know on the inside is what we are on the outside, most of the time at least. And I think that the mindfulness world has a lot to offer that occurring in a real way. You know, all the work of mindfulness is about all of those things. So I would also say that schools, to me, are still one of the most critical places we can give energy to. If we think about, you know, where do most kids in at least the developing world go on a regular basis, the hours that are spent, et cetera, plus out of school time that is now getting connected to in school time, what incredible opportunity we have in schools to make a change in our paradigm of how we think about what it means to be an educated person. And that this vision would be so stretched that our heart and spirit would have room for it to be there. So I'm hoping that that happens as well. And I feel that we do need a change of mind, you know, and that, interestingly enough, the mindfulness world might be able to give us that, because we really need to change our perspective in what it is we mean by success, what it is we mean by, you know, that young person is going to be a healthy individual who has good relationships with people, that has work that matters, and all of those things. It's beyond has a job. Do they feel that they have a purpose in that job? So I think it's just a whole other level of what we need in young people today to create the solutions around what they are facing and what we are facing that are pretty scary and imminent, particularly the climate crisis.
So I'm not arguing, I'm just pushing back. I work on the ground in schools, and my experience is that there's a fair amount of gridlock in schools, and not because anybody's a bad actor per se. But there may be some, you know, mean-minded people, but that's not generally the people you find in schools. The underfunding of schools in the communities where I work, in the state of Colorado, the trauma that students are bringing into the schools from their outside lives, the trauma that is part of schools because of the way we're responding to school violence, the financial stress that is on teachers because they often don't make enough money to live in communities where they teach, and they often have long commutes, and they have their own families, and they have their own parents, and they have excessively full lives. So all of these conspire in many places to make it very difficult to. They couldn't need anything more than mindfulness, and yet they don't seem to be able to find the way towards it. What advice might you share with people who feel that they're in a situation that's so tightly wound up that there may not, they don't see possibilities?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I appreciate you mentioning all of those things. And that my hope, as we think about the future, is that different people will consider those different things that you mentioned their purpose for living and for moving it forward. So I'm counting on all of that happening at the same time, you know, when we talk about, well, what can schools do, you know? Also, I feel like this more current work we're doing in social emotional learning, we are bringing it to a different level. And I think we could even bring it to a bigger level than that. We are talking about changing policies, you know, that we are talking about changing structures. That's different from what we've said in the past, by the way. So I'd like to just say that this may be the opportunity we've been waiting for. You know, I don't think there's going to be a deconstruction completely, but it's moving in more of an open way of thinking about what prevents learning from happening and how can we look at those things. I think of this story that was told to me by a minister who was visiting an elderly woman. And she was sitting behind a bookshelf in her home. And all of a sudden she had to go to the bathroom. So he just was letting his eyes wander. And he saw like everything was really like neat. And then it got just like crazy cluttered and really, really messy. And so when she came back into the room, he kind of mentioned this, you know, and he said, you know, I've noticed that, you know, and she said, well, you can clean up as far as you could reach. And this is what I feel we have to do. We have to see the big picture, but we have to clean up as far as we can reach, you know, and we know that every single one of us has a circle of influence. And that influence is more than we can realize. And if we put the concept of that consciousness is open, then it's even more than we realize, you know, in terms of what we can do. And so those little efforts that we make have a rippling effect without a question. And we need to see ourselves as building the cathedral, not being the bricklayer, you know. And we need to have that feeling all the time about what we do. And sometimes teachers are lucky enough, I'm sure many of the teachers who are listening have had an opportunity where a student has come back and said, thank you for, and they've said what they're thankful for, but you don't even remember what that day was that you said that to them. And that happens many, many times in the world of education for teachers and students. And so I think we need to just be aware of that and know that every little bit makes a difference in the right direction.
Anything else that's on your mind about the world, about your work, you want to share?
That's such a big question.
I know, but you have a big perspective, and this is your chance to.
What's that?
You have a big perspective, and this is an
well,
opportunity.
I clearly feel that one of the most important things we could do is to know what gifts we need to give the world and where we need to pass that somebody else can do. And I feel like that's a key piece of awareness that I've had for a long time. And sometimes it's hard to say no to someone, but I know that that no means that they will get somebody else that can do it just as well. But then there are some things that are for only us to do, or it may never happen. And I think that's what we have to keep asking ourselves, including just a phone call we need to make to someone, thinking that, oh, everybody knows that person broke their ankle. I'm sure they're getting many phone calls, and maybe they're not. And it may be me that needs to do the phone call. That's a small one, but then there are bigger ones, you know. I think I've done many things that if I had not taken my step in it, honestly, they would not have happened. And being at the 25th anniversary of Castle was a humbling experience. When the six of us were together forming what's now Castle, first of all, we didn't have a clue that we were forming an organization, that's for sure. And we didn't have a clue that last week we would be looking out to 1,400 people from all over the world who were celebrating the 25th anniversary of it. And yet I feel that if each one of us did not step up with this inner calling that we clearly had, we each played a critical role in birthing Castle. And there are many, many experiences like that, that if we don't step up, either individually or collectively as we did, then it might not happen. It will not happen. And so those are the things we need to discover. What are those things for each of us personally? And do them.
Inspiring thoughts in a challenging time all around. Thank you so much, Linda Lantieri, for spending time with us and sharing your wisdom. And thank you very much for all you have done and all the ways you've stepped in to make things happen.
Thank you.